Have you ever wondered what happens when a state's economy finally runs out of gas? The roads crumble, schools close, jobs vanish, and people pack their bags faster than you can say we're moving to Florida. For a lot of Americans, this isn't just a scary movie plot, it's a very real possibility. We're living in an era where state budgets are stretched thinner than a yoga instructor. Debt levels are hitting record highs, and some states are literally one economic hiccup away from serious trouble. When the federal money spigot gets turned down, when industries collapse, or when natural disasters pile on top of existing problems, some states just can't bounce back. Today, we're breaking down the 10 US states most likely to collapse first if the economy crashes. Some of these won't surprise you, you've probably seen the writing on the wall for years. Others might shock you because they put on a good show. But every state on this list has one thing in common: fragile foundations that can't handle a hard hit. Because let's face it, if you're planning to retire in the next decade, you need to know which places will still be standing when the dust settles. Wait, before we continue, we've got something special for you, a digital retirement planner that we've been using. Designed by a financial analyst. It shows you exactly how your savings, expenses, and income line up, with easy charts and automatic calculations. And here's the best part, we're giving it away at up to 95% off to say thanks for helping this channel grow. Not free, but pretty close. Link in the description. Let's get started. Number 10, Mississippi. If you think the economy is tough where you live, Mississippi makes everywhere else look like Beverly Hills. Let me explain why. Mississippi has long struggled with poverty, and the numbers tell the story. Median household income here is around $62,000, nearly 25% below the national average. Almost 1 in 4 residents live below the poverty line. That's not a typo, that's reality. The state's heavy reliance on agriculture and low-wage manufacturing has left it decades behind more diversified economies. Cotton, soybeans, and catfish farming just don't generate the wealth they used to. And with nearly half its workforce out of the labor pool, Mississippi is essentially running on fumes. But here's what makes it really scary for retirees: the healthcare system is in shambles. Mississippi has some of the highest rates of diabetes, heart disease, and obesity in the nation, but also some of the fewest doctors per capita. Rural hospitals have been closing at an alarming rate, over 10 have shuttered in the past decade alone. The infrastructure is crumbling too. Mississippi's roads are rated among the worst in the nation, bridges are falling apart, and the water crisis in Jackson showed just how fragile basic services have become. When your capital city can't provide clean drinking water, you know you're in trouble. Add in a tax base that's shrinking as young people flee to other states, and Mississippi is caught in a death spiral. The state relies heavily on federal aid. Nearly 40% of its budget comes from Washington, so any cuts in federal spending would hit Mississippi like a sledgehammer. If Washington sneezes, Mississippi catches pneumonia. In a real economic collapse, this state would be among the first to go under. This next one has beads, bourbon, and brass bands, but take away the tourists, and this place looks more like a financial house of cards. Number 9, Louisiana. Behind the Mardi Gras parades and Cajun cooking lies a fragile economy that's more vulnerable than most people realize. Louisiana depends heavily on oil and gas. About 16% of the state's revenue comes directly from oil and gas taxes. That's about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. When oil prices drop, the state budget tanks almost immediately. The numbers are brutal. Louisiana has lost over 130,000 people since 2010, making it one of the fastest shrinking states in America. Young, educated workers are leaving for Texas, Florida, and other states with better opportunities. What's left behind is an aging population that needs more services but generates less tax revenue. Then there's the geography problem. Louisiana is literally sinking. Coastal erosion claims about 25 square miles of land every year. Hurricane Ida in 2021 caused $18 billion in damages, and Hurricane Katrina's effects are still being felt nearly 2 decades later. The state spends billions on hurricane recovery, but there's never enough money to get ahead of the next storm. The infrastructure is a disaster waiting to happen. Louisiana has over 1,600 structurally deficient bridges, more per capita than almost any other state. The levee system that protects New Orleans and other coastal areas needs constant maintenance that the state can barely afford. Add in some of the worst poverty rates in the nation, a healthcare system that ranks 50th nationally, and a public education system that drives families away, and Louisiana's gumbo of problems is going to boil over when the next crash comes. For retirees, Louisiana offers cheap living costs, but you get what you pay for: unreliable infrastructure, limited healthcare options, and the constant threat of natural disasters wiping out everything you've worked for. Next, comeback story makes great headlines, until you drive a few blocks and realize half the neighborhood looks like a set from The Walking Dead. Number 8, Michigan. Michigan still leans heavily on the auto industry, which means every recession hits twice as hard here. When cars don't sell, jobs vanish faster than free pizza at a college dorm. During the Great Recession, Michigan lost nearly 400,000 jobs and never fully recovered to pre-2008 employment levels. Detroit's comeback is mostly hype and downtown real estate speculation. Sure, some areas look better, but the city still has over 20 square miles of vacant land, that's bigger than Manhattan. Entire neighborhoods are still abandoned, property values remain dirt cheap for a reason, and the city's pension obligations are a ticking time bomb. The state also suffers from crumbling infrastructure that makes Louisiana look well maintained. Michigan's roads are famously terrible, consistently ranked worst in the nation. The state needs about $4 billion annually just to maintain current road conditions, but only spends about half that. Every winter makes things worse, and every spring reveals new potholes that could swallow a small car. Population decline is crushing tax revenues. Michigan has lost over 600,000 residents since 2000, and the exodus continues. The Upper Peninsula is practically emptying out, leaving behind aging populations that need expensive services but can't generate enough tax revenue to pay for them. Here's the kicker: Michigan's state pension system is underfunded by about $29 billion. When the next recession hits, the state will face impossible choices between paying retirees or maintaining basic services. The truth: Michigan's economy looks better on paper than in real life. The auto industry is slowly moving south and overseas, manufacturing jobs continue to disappear, and the state hasn't successfully diversified its economy despite decades of trying. If another national downturn hits, the cracks will widen into sinkholes. This next state looks invincible, until you scratch the surface and see the cracks in its cowboy boots. Number 7, Texas. This one might surprise you. On paper, Texas is booming. Massive GDP, job growth, and newcomers pouring in from California and other high-tax states. Major corporations are relocating their headquarters to Texas, and the population has been growing steadily for decades. But here's the catch: nearly 36% of Texans are in financial distress, making it the second highest rate in the country. All that growth has been largely low-wage service jobs, while housing costs have skyrocketed in Austin, Dallas, and Houston. The median home price in Austin has tripled in just 15 years, pricing out middle-class families and retirees on fixed incomes. The state's dependence on oil is a huge vulnerability that most people ignore. When oil prices crashed in 2015 to 2016, Texas lost over 100,000 energy jobs and the ripple effects devastated related industries. The next oil bust, and there will be one, could be even worse as the world slowly transitions away from fossil fuels. Texas's infamous 2021 grid failure showed just how fragile the infrastructure really is. The state's deregulated electricity market prioritized profits over reliability, leaving millions without power during a winter storm. Over 200 people died, and damages exceeded $195 billion. The grid is still vulnerable, and climate change is making extreme weather events more frequent and severe. Water is becoming a serious problem too. Texas is facing its worst drought in decades, and growing populations in Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas are straining water supplies. Some communities are already implementing water restrictions, and the situation will only get worse. Then there's the political instability. Texas government has become increasingly focused on culture war issues rather than infrastructure, education, and economic diversification. The state's abortion ban and other controversial laws are driving away businesses and young professionals, potentially undermining future economic growth. Add in skyrocketing property taxes. Texas has no state income tax, but property taxes are among the highest in the nation, and retirees here could be priced out or left in the cold, literally. Texas might look like the future, but when the crash comes, the future may not be as bright as all those neon cowboy hats. If debt were an Olympic sport, this next state would have more gold medals than Michael Phelps has in swimming. Number 6, Illinois. Illinois has the worst funded pension system in the nation, with unfunded liabilities topping $140 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than $11,000 for every single resident of the state, including babies and grandparents. The state is legally required to make these pension payments, but there's literally not enough money to do it without bankrupting everything else. Property taxes are sky high and getting worse every year, driving middle-class families out at an alarming rate. Some Chicago suburbs have effective property tax rates over 3%, meaning if you own a $300,000 house, you're paying $9,000 plus annually just in property taxes. For retirees on fixed incomes, this is unsustainable. The state has already been bleeding population for a decade. Illinois has lost more residents than any other state except New York. Over 250,000 people left Illinois between 2020 and 2022 alone. Chicago itself is drowning in debt while crime rates scare off both businesses and residents. The city's population is now smaller than it was in 1920. But here's what makes Illinois truly dangerous for retirees. The state has been playing accounting games for decades, borrowing money to pay current expenses and pushing problems into the future. The COVID pandemic gave the state temporary federal relief, but that money is running out, and the underlying problems are worse than ever. Illinois also has some of the worst business conditions in the country. Regulations are complex and costly, taxes are high, and the political culture is notoriously corrupt. Major corporations continue to move their headquarters to states with better business climates. When the next recession comes, Illinois won't have a safety net. It'll be like falling off a cliff with no parachute. The state will face impossible choices: drastically cut services, dramatically raise taxes, or default on its obligations. None of these options are good for retirees. Next may look like paradise, but financially, it's more like a luxury cruise ship with a massive leak in the hull. Number 5, Hawaii. The cost of living in Hawaii is astronomical. Homes average over $835,000, and that's for the entire state, not just beachfront property. A gallon of milk costs $6, gasoline regularly hits $5 per gallon, and groceries are nearly double the national average. Even if you own your home outright, the cost of simply existing in Hawaii is crushing for most retirees. But the real vulnerability is Hawaii's overwhelming reliance on tourism. Before COVID, tourism accounted for about 25% of all jobs and generated $17 billion annually. When travel stopped in 2020, Hawaii's unemployment rate shot up to 22%, the highest in the nation. Thousands of hotel workers, restaurant employees, and tour guides were suddenly out of work with no backup plan. The pandemic showed just how fragile this paradise really is. With tourism down, tax revenues collapsed, and the state had to make severe budget cuts. Many small businesses never reopened, and even now, the tourism industry hasn't fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Add in the recent Maui wildfires that killed over 100 people and caused $5.5 billion in damages, and you see how quickly paradise can turn into a nightmare. The state's emergency management systems were completely overwhelmed, and recovery will take years and billions of dollars the state doesn't have. Shipping disruptions are another major vulnerability. Nearly everything in Hawaii is imported, so when supply chains get disrupted, whether by pandemic, strikes, or global economic problems, prices skyrocket immediately. During COVID, some grocery stores had empty shelves for weeks. The population is aging rapidly, and young people are leaving in droves because they can't afford to live there. This creates a dangerous spiral: fewer working-age people to support more retirees, while the cost of providing services continues to rise. Hawaii's isolation also makes healthcare expensive and limited. For serious medical conditions, residents often have to fly to the mainland, turning medical emergencies into financial disasters. During any national economic downturn, Hawaii's economy could collapse almost overnight. Tourism would dry up, unemployment would skyrocket, and the high cost of living would become completely unsustainable for most residents, including retirees. You can buy great bourbon in this next one, but you can't buy a strong economy, and you definitely can't buy your way out of the mess this state is in. Number 4, Kentucky. Coal once fueled Kentucky's prosperity, but those days are gone forever. The state lost more than 70% of its coal jobs in the past 15 years, we're talking about entire communities where mining was the only good-paying career option. Nothing of equal scale has replaced them, leaving behind ghost towns and families struggling to survive. The transition to renewable energy has been brutal for Kentucky. While other states diversified their economies, Kentucky doubled down on fossil fuels and is now paying the price. Attempts to attract new industries have largely failed, partly because the state lacks the educated workforce that modern employers want. Rural hospitals are closing at an alarming rate. Kentucky has lost 8 rural hospitals since 2010, with more on the chopping block. For retirees in rural areas, this means driving hours for basic medical care or moving to expensive urban areas where healthcare is available but housing costs are rising rapidly. Poverty rates are among the highest in the country, with some eastern Kentucky counties having poverty rates over 40%. The opioid epidemic continues to devastate communities, destroying families and making entire regions virtually uninhabitable for healthy retirees. Kentucky is also one of the most federally dependent states in the Union. Nearly 40% of the state budget comes from federal aid. This makes Kentucky incredibly vulnerable to any cuts in federal spending. If Washington tightens its belt, Kentucky gets squeezed first and hardest. The state's pension system is severely underfunded, creating future obligations that the state simply cannot meet without dramatic tax increases or service cuts. The teachers' pension system alone is underfunded by over $14 billion. Infrastructure is crumbling throughout the state. Kentucky has over 1,100 structurally deficient bridges, many in rural areas where replacement costs are high but tax revenues are low. Roads in coal country are falling apart, and there's no money to fix them. For retirees, Kentucky offers low housing costs, but you're essentially buying into a state in managed decline. Services are being cut, healthcare is becoming less accessible, and the economic future looks bleak. When the money stops flowing in this next state, this doesn't just slow down, it falls off a cliff into a canyon of debt and broken dreams. Number 3, Nevada. Nevada thrives on tourism, gambling, and entertainment, which make up about a quarter of all jobs in the state. But those industries are the absolute first to collapse in any recession. When people are worried about paying rent, they don't fly to Vegas to lose money at blackjack tables. The numbers are scary. During 2020, Nevada's unemployment rate hit 30%, the highest in modern US history. Las Vegas looked like a ghost town, with empty hotels and shuttered casinos stretching for miles. Even when restrictions lifted, recovery was slow because tourism is about discretionary spending, and that's the first thing people cut when times get tough. Nevada's tax structure makes the state incredibly vulnerable. The state refuses to levy an income tax, instead relying heavily on sales taxes and gaming revenues. When tourism crashes, both of those revenue sources disappear simultaneously, leaving the state with no backup plan. The state also has very small rainy day reserves compared to most states. Nevada's rainy day fund could barely cover state operations for a few weeks, while more prepared states have reserves that could last months or years. Here's what most people don't realize: Nevada's population boom over the past 30 years was largely fueled by Californians fleeing high taxes and housing costs. But many of these transplants are still financially tied to California through investments, pensions, or family businesses. When California's economy struggles, Nevada feels the pain immediately. The housing market is another vulnerability. Nevada had some of the worst foreclosure rates during the Great Recession, and prices are once again becoming unaffordable for many residents. Las Vegas and Reno have seen home prices rise 40 to 50% in just a few years, pricing out middle-class families and retirees on fixed incomes. Water is a growing crisis that most retirees don't consider. Nevada gets most of its water from the Colorado River, but Lake Mead has dropped to record low levels. The state is already under water restrictions, and the situation will only get worse as climate change progresses and population growth continues. It's essentially a one-industry economy dressed up in neon lights. When the lights go out, there's not much left behind. If your hospital closes and your bridge collapses on the same day, that would be this next one, where infrastructure goes to die. Number 2, Alabama. Alabama struggles with high poverty, low wages, and infrastructure that belongs in a museum. Over 40% of rural hospitals are at immediate risk of closure, and several have already shut down, leaving entire counties without emergency medical care. For retirees with health concerns, this is a nightmare scenario. The state has nearly 500 bridges that are structurally deficient. That's about 1 in 8 bridges that could potentially collapse without warning. Many of these bridges are in rural areas where replacement costs are high but tax revenues are minimal. The state transportation budget is so tight that they're literally choosing which bridges to keep open and which ones to close permanently. Alabama leans heavily on low-wage industries like poultry processing, textile manufacturing, and basic agriculture. These are exactly the types of jobs that disappear first in any economic downturn. The state has tried to attract auto manufacturing, but those plants are highly automated and don't provide the widespread employment that older industries used to offer. Education funding is among the worst in the nation, which creates a cycle of poverty that's nearly impossible to break. Young people who can afford college typically leave the state and never return, draining Alabama of the educated workforce needed for economic diversification. The state's tax system is regressive and inadequate. Alabama has one of the lowest tax burdens in the nation, which sounds good until you realize it means the state can't afford basic services. Property taxes are extremely low, which helps homeowners but starves local governments of the revenue needed for schools, police, and infrastructure maintenance. Here's the really scary part: 42% of Alabama's state budget comes from federal aid. That makes Alabama incredibly vulnerable to any reduction in federal spending. If Congress decides to cut domestic programs, Alabama would face immediate budget catastrophes that could trigger a complete breakdown of state services. For retirees, Alabama offers very affordable housing and low taxes, but you're essentially trading money for safety and services. When your nearest hospital is an hour away and the bridges might not be safe to cross, those savings don't look so attractive anymore. We saved the best for last. If the US economy catches a cold, this next state ends up on life support with no health insurance to pay for it. Number 1, West Virginia. West Virginia is already in the midst of a slow-motion economic collapse that's been decades in the making. Coal once fueled the state's prosperity, but production has been cut in half since 2012, and it's never coming back. Entire towns that existed solely to support mining operations are now virtual ghost towns. Jobs disappeared faster than snow in July. When the mines closed, everything else followed: restaurants, shops, gas stations, schools. Young people moved away in massive numbers, leaving behind aging populations that need expensive medical care but can't generate enough tax revenue to pay for it. Workforce participation in West Virginia is among the lowest in the nation. Only about 55% of working-age adults are actually employed or looking for work. That means nearly half the potential workforce has simply given up, often due to disability, addiction, or lack of opportunity. The opioid epidemic has devastated West Virginia more than any other state. The state has the highest overdose death rate in the nation, and entire families have been destroyed by addiction. This creates massive social costs that the state can't afford while simultaneously reducing the workforce and tax base. Healthcare is in complete crisis. West Virginia has lost multiple rural hospitals, and many others are on the verge of closing. The state has a shortage of doctors, specialists, and mental health professionals. For retirees with serious health conditions, living in West Virginia can be literally life-threatening due to lack of accessible medical care. The brain drain is catastrophic. West Virginia consistently ranks last or near last in college graduation rates, and most graduates immediately leave the state for better opportunities elsewhere. This leaves behind a population that's older, less educated, and less able to adapt to economic changes. Infrastructure is falling apart throughout the state. Roads wind through mountains that are expensive to maintain, bridges cross valleys that are costly to rebuild, and the harsh winters destroy everything faster than the state can repair it. West Virginia has been in slow-motion decline for decades, and another economic crash could push it into complete collapse. The state has no economic diversity, no young workforce, no major cities to anchor growth, and no realistic plan for rebuilding its economy. So, what do you think? Is your state on the danger list? We'd love to hear from you. If you want more related topics, watch these videos next. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching.